Admiral Daeho Kim stood at the observation window of Proxima Station and stared into the darkness of space. His reflection looked back at him, showing a man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been watching the stars for 30 years, and in all that time, he had never stopped being afraid of what might come from them. The year was 2287. Earth and its colonies controlled 47 star systems. It was not much compared to the great empires that ruled thousands of worlds, but it was enough. It was home. And Daeho had sworn to protect it. Outside his window, the warning buoys floated in their assigned positions. They had been there for decades, silent and patient. Each one marked the edge of human territory. Each one carried a simple message that repeated in 17 different languages. Do not cross this line. Turn back now. This is your only warning. Most aliens respected the warnings. They understood that humans meant what they said. But there were always some who did not believe. Some who thought the warnings were empty threats. Some who thought humans were too weak to back up their words. Those aliens learned the truth too late. Daeho touched the window with his fingertips. The glass was cold. He remembered the contact wars, the first time humans met hostile aliens. He had been young then, commanding a small patrol ship. His squadron had tried to make peaceful contact with a fleet of unknown vessels. The aliens had responded by opening fire. 17 ships destroyed in less than 5 minutes. Daeho survived only because his ship had engine trouble and was lagging behind the others. He had watched his friends die. He had learned that in space, mercy could get you killed. After the contact wars ended, Earth built the Sol Defense Perimeter. The network of automated buoys and defense stations that would never hesitate, never show mercy, never give second chances. It was harsh, but it kept humans alive. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. His second-in-command, Captain Minho Park, appeared on the communication screen. Minho was young, only 32 years old, with sharp eyes and an idealistic streak that worried Daeho. Admiral, we have a situation, Minho said. His voice was calm, but Daeho could hear the tension underneath. A fleet has entered the outer detection zone. 47 vessels. They're Vex. Daeho felt his stomach tighten. The Vex Imperium, one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the galaxy. They controlled thousands of worlds and had never been seriously challenged. They were not cruel exactly, but they believed that might made right. They took what they wanted because no one could stop them. Show me, Daeho said. The screen changed to show a tactical map. 47 red dots moved steadily toward human space. They were still far away, but they were coming fast. In 16 hours, they would reach the border. Have they received the warnings? Daeho asked. Yes, sir. 3 automated warnings so far. They're ignoring all of them. Daeho closed his eyes for a moment. Of course they were ignoring the warnings. The Vex had been expanding for thousands of years. They probably thought human borders were just suggestions. They probably thought the warnings were bluffs. Send additional warnings in Vex Standard, Daeho ordered. Make sure they understand clearly what will happen if they cross the line. Already done, sir. Our translation software has sent warnings in 17 languages, including 3 Vex dialects. On the HSS Sentinel, one of the defense frigates patrolling the border, Captain Minho Park watched the Vex fleet approach. His communications officer, Lieutenant Ji-Wan Choi, sat at her station with headphones on, listening intently to the alien transmissions. Ji-Wan was brilliant with languages. She had learned 17 alien languages in 5 years. She could hear patterns in alien speech that others missed. Right now she was trying to decode the Vex communications, hoping to understand their intentions. Captain, Ji-Wan said quietly, I'm picking up their internal chatter. I think I can translate some of it. What are they saying? Minho asked. Ji-Wan listened for another moment, her face growing pale. They're calling our warnings primitive territorial displays. They think we don't have the power to back them up. One of their commanders just said no credible opposition detected. Minho felt anger rise in his chest. The Vex were dismissing them. They thought humans were too weak to be a real threat. They had no idea what they were walking into. But Minho also felt fear. Because once the Vex crossed the border, the defense system would activate automatically, and it could not be stopped, it could not be called back. It would destroy every ship that crossed the line, no matter what. No surrender would be accepted. No mercy would be given. We need to make them understand, Minho said. There has to be a way to communicate. They don't know what they're doing. Also aboard the Sentinel was diplomat Sumi Han. She was Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Assembly, the government that tried to keep peace between the many alien species. Sumi had prevented 3 wars through careful negotiation and compromise. She was aboard the Sentinel as an observer, watching how the military enforced the borders she helped define through treaties. Now, as she watched the crisis unfold, Sumi felt a growing sense of dread. She had spent years building relationships with other species, convincing them that humans were peaceful and reasonable. But the Sol defense perimeter told a different story. It said that humans would kill anyone who crossed their borders without hesitation, without mercy. How long until they reached the border? Sumi asked. 15 hours and 43 minutes, Minho replied. Sumi immediately opened a communication channel to the Galactic Assembly. She needed help. She needed intervention. Surely the Assembly could contact the Vex and convince them to turn back. But when she reached the Assembly's Emergency Council, the response was not what she hoped for. The Council expressed concern about the situation. They said they would look into the matter. They suggested that perhaps human borders were unusually restrictive and that the defense protocols seemed potentially excessive. In other words, they thought humans were overreacting. They thought the Vex were just passing through and humans should let them. They did not understand that the defense system had no setting for just passing through. It only understood 2 states: inside the border or outside the border. Sumi ended the call feeling sick. No help was coming from the Assembly. If the Vex crossed the line, 47 ships would be destroyed, and Earth would be blamed for the massacre. The galaxy would call humans monsters. Back on Proxima Station, Admiral Deho sat in his command chair and watched the countdown timer. 15 hours and 21 minutes until the Vex fleet reached the border. He had the power to deactivate the defense system. It required his command code and a biometric scan. He could stop the automated response, but if he did, what then? Would the Vex turn back grateful for the mercy? Or would they see it as confirmation that humans were weak? Would they press forward, claiming human territory? Perhaps attacking the Ross 128 colony where 2.3 million civilians lived? Deho had faced this choice before, during the contact wars. He had chosen mercy then, had tried to give aliens the benefit of the doubt. His friends died because of that choice. He would not make the same mistake twice, but he also knew that 134,000 Vex personnel were aboard those 47 ships, living beings with families and futures. If they crossed the border, they would all die, and he would have to live with that for the rest of his life. The countdown timer continued its steady march toward 0, 14 hours and 52 minutes remaining. The Vex fleet showed no signs of slowing down. 4 hours remained until the Vex fleet would cross into human territory. Captain Minho Park made a decision that would change everything. He did not ask for permission. He did not wait for orders. He simply acted. "Helm, take us across the border," Minho commanded. "Position the Sentinel directly in the path of the Vex fleet." His crew stared at him in shock. What he was ordering was not just unusual. It was dangerous. It was possibly illegal. The Sentinel was a military vessel, and military vessels did not cross into neutral space during a crisis. It could be seen as an act of aggression, but Minho believed that someone needed to show the Vex that humans were real, that this was not just an automated system sending warnings, that living people were making these decisions and living people would die if the Vex continued. "Sir, Admiral Deho will have you court-martialed for this," his second officer said quietly. "Better a court-martial than watching 134,000 beings die without trying to save them," Minho replied. "Now move the ship." The Sentinel crossed the border and positioned itself between the approaching Vex fleet and human territory. Minho opened all communication channels and began broadcasting directly to the alien ships. "This is Captain Minho Park of the Human Defense Force. I am speaking to you not as a recording, but as a living person. Please turn back. You do not understand what you are approaching. Our defense system is automated. It cannot be stopped once triggered. It will destroy every ship that crosses our border. There will be no warnings after the line is crossed. There will be no chance to surrender. Please, for the sake of your crews, turn back now." On Proxima Station, Admiral Deho saw what Minho had done. His face turned red with anger and fear. He opened a direct channel to the Sentinel. "Captain Park, return to your patrol position immediately. That is a direct order." "I cannot do that, sir," Minho said calmly. "Someone has to make them understand. You are putting yourself in danger." The Vex could fire on you. Then at least they will have shown their intentions clearly. But I believe they do not want war. They simply do not believe our warnings. The Vex fleet's response came minutes later. Their weapon systems locked onto the Sentinel. Targeting lasers painted the small human ship. But they did not fire. Instead, a communication channel opened. Lieutenant Ji-won Choi almost jumped out of her seat. "Captain, we have an incoming transmission." "It's from one of the Vex ships." "Put it through," Minho said, his heart pounding. The voice that came through was strange, filtered through translation software but understandable. "This is Rick's cultural attaché to the Vex exploration fleet. Your concern is noted, human captain, but you must understand our perspective. In 10,000 years of expansion, we have encountered many species with territorial claims. None have been able to enforce such claims against us. Your warnings appear disproportionate to your apparent capabilities." Ji-won leaned forward, activating her own microphone. She had been studying Vex culture and language. She knew how to phrase things in a way they might understand. "Attaché Rix, this is Lieutenant Ji-won Choi. I am a student of Vex culture. I have read your histories. I know that your people value strength and efficiency. Please understand that our warnings are not empty. We learned through terrible experience that borders without absolute enforcement mean no safety. 60 years ago, we tried diplomacy with those who entered our space. They saw our mercy as weakness and attacked. 17 ships were destroyed. Since then, we have built a defense that shows no mercy because we cannot risk showing mercy again." There was a long pause. Then Rick spoke again, his tone different, more thoughtful. "You speak of trauma, of defensive necessity born from attack. This is understandable. But surely there is room for verification, for mutual assessment?" "There might be," Ji-won said, choosing her words carefully. "If you turn back now and request a formal meeting at a neutral location, we can share information. We can establish proper diplomatic channels. But not this way. Not by crossing our borders without permission." For 20 precious minutes, Ji-won and Rix talked. They discussed culture, history, the nature of territory and sovereignty. It was the first real conversation between humans and Vex. It was progress. It was hope. Rick said he would relay the conversation to his superiors. He promised to recommend that the fleet turn back and pursue proper diplomatic channels. Ji-won felt a surge of relief. Maybe they could avoid disaster after all. But Rix was a junior attaché. His communications were monitored and filtered by military command. When his report reached the fleet commander, Fleet Admiral Thex, it was summarized in 3 lines. Cultural officer engaged in discussion with humans. Humans showed signs of defensive anxiety. Recommend continued observation. The crucial details of Ji-won's warnings were lost in translation and bureaucracy. Fleet Admiral Thex read the summary, dismissed it as unimportant, and ordered the fleet to continue on course. Diplomat Sumi Han, watching from the Sentinel's observation deck, felt her hope drain away. She had seen this pattern before in diplomatic failures. 2 sides genuinely trying to communicate, but the message getting lost somewhere between junior officers and senior commanders. Cultural differences turning simple statements into misunderstandings. Bureaucracy filtering out the most important information. She realized with horrible clarity that this was not a failure of will or intention. Both sides thought they were being reasonable. Both sides believed they were in the right, but they were operating from completely incompatible frameworks. The Vex saw borders as inefficient barriers that prevented the optimal use of resources. They believed power should flow to those who could use it best. In their worldview, claiming territory you could not defend was meaningless. Humans saw borders as sacred. As the only thing standing between survival and extinction, they had learned that without clear boundaries, defended absolutely, there was no safety. Only the law of the strong. Neither side was evil. Neither side was wrong within their own context. But those contexts did not overlap. And now, because of that gap in understanding, thousands were going to die. 3 hours and 12 minutes remained. The Vex fleet showed no signs of slowing. Ji-won tried desperately to re-establish contact with Rix, but his communication channel had been closed by his superiors. Captain Minho received another order from Admiral Daeho to return to human territory. This time the order included a warning. If Minho did not comply, Daeho would have no choice but to classify the Sentinel as a rogue vessel. Minho looked at his crew. They were frightened but standing firm. They believed in what they were doing. They believed that bearing witness mattered even if they could not change the outcome. "We stay," Minho said quietly. "We gave them our warning. We tried to make them understand. Now we bear witness to what happens next." 2 hours remained. Then 1 hour. The Vex fleet continued forward, massive ships moving through space with terrible momentum. Too fast to stop quickly, too confident to turn back. Admiral Deho sat in his command chair, hands gripping the armrests. He still had the power to deactivate the defense system. He still had time. But if he did and the Vex attacked, millions of civilians would pay the price for his mercy. 30 minutes remained. The leading edge of the Vex fleet approached the red line that marked human territory. On their ships, crews went about their duties unaware that they were moments from death. In their cultural context, they were simply exploring. In the human context, they were invading. 10 minutes. 5 minutes. 2 minutes. At 0347 hours, the first Vex ship crossed the red line into human territory. For 2.7 seconds, nothing happened. The ship continued forward, its shields raised, its sensors scanning. Then the sole defense perimeter activated. The ancient technology built into the warning buoys decades ago came to life. It did not fire weapons. It did not launch missiles. It did something far more fundamental. It tore a hole in space itself. The first Vex ship simply disappeared. One moment it was there, solid and real. The next moment, there was only empty space where it had been. No explosion, no debris, just absence. Aboard the Sentinel, the crew watched in horror. Jiwan's hands covered her mouth. Minho's face had gone white. Sumi closed her eyes and whispered a prayer for the dead. The second ship crossed the line. It vanished. Then the third, the fourth. The Vex fleet tried to retreat, engines burning at maximum power. But they had built up too much momentum. Ship after ship crossed the fatal boundary and disappeared into nothing. It would take 6 hours for all 47 ships to vanish. 6 hours of watching an entire fleet be erased from existence, one ship at a time. The last Vex ship disappeared at 0947 hours. 6 hours of watching an entire fleet be erased from existence. 134,000 lives gone in silence. No explosions. No debris fields. Just empty space where proud vessels had been. Captain Minho Park sat in his command chair aboard the Sentinel, unable to move. His crew was silent around him. Some were crying. Others stared at their screens with empty eyes. They had witnessed something that would haunt them forever. Lieutenant Jiwan Choi had maintained her communication channel with Rix until the moment his ship crossed the line. She heard his voice, confused and frightened, asking why the humans would not stop their weapons. Then his voice cut off mid-word. Just silence. Those last words would replay in her mind every night for years to come. "Why won't you stop?" As if stopping were possible. As if the automated system cared about please or surrender. Diplomat Sumi Han had recorded everything. Every moment of the 6-hour disaster. She knew she would need to show this to the Galactic Assembly. She would need to justify what had happened. But she also knew no justification would be enough. She had watched 134,000 beings die, and she felt the weight of every single death. On Proxima Station, Admiral Deho aged 10 years in 6 hours. He had not given the order to fire. He had not activated the weapons. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do, operating automatically once triggered. But he still felt responsible. He was the commanding officer. The deaths happened on his watch. He had known this day might come. He had prepared himself mentally for the possibility, but preparation meant nothing when faced with the reality. 34,000 deaths. He could not stop thinking about that number. Within hours, the news spread across the galaxy. The disappearance of the Vex Scout fleet became the biggest story in 1,000 years. 47 ships gone, not destroyed in battle, not captured, simply erased from existence. The Vex Imperium refused to make any public statement, but inside their government, emergency sessions were held at the highest levels. Fleet Admiral Thex was removed from command. Not because he failed tactically, but because he had underestimated an opponent so badly that an entire fleet was lost. For the Vex, who had not suffered a major military defeat in thousands of years, the loss was shocking. It forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about lesser species. The Galactic Assembly called an emergency session. 17 member species demanded that humanity be punished. Some called for economic sanctions. Others wanted humans expelled from the assembly entirely. A few of the more aggressive species even suggested military action to contain the human threat. But 23 species remained silent during the debate. These were worlds that had suffered under Vex expansion in the past, species that had lost territory, resources, and lives to the empire that claimed might made right. They did not celebrate the deaths, but they quietly approved of seeing the Vex humbled. Earth's own government split into factions. The Defense Coalition argued that the system had worked perfectly. It had prevented what could have become a full-scale invasion. It had protected human colonies and civilians. The harsh response was necessary to maintain security. The diplomatic corps argued the opposite. They said humanity had made itself a pariah. That fear was not the same as respect. That being isolated and hated by most of the galaxy was not a sustainable position. That eventually, enough species would band together to neutralize the human threat. Captain Minho submitted a formal report recommending changes to the defense protocols. He argued that the system should be able to recognize surrender, that it should have proportional response options, that automated defenses without human oversight were too dangerous. His report was classified and buried. The military leadership feared that any admission the system could be improved would be seen as weakness. Any suggestion that the response was excessive would undermine the deterrent effect. Admiral Deho testified before Earth Security Council. The questioning was harsh. Some council members accused him of murder. Others praised him for protecting humanity. The divided reaction reflected the split in human society. "Admiral, if you could go back, would you change anything?" one counselor asked. Deho thought for a long moment before answering. "No, I would not." The Vex received multiple warnings. They chose to ignore them. If I had deactivated the defense system and they had attacked, civilian deaths would have been in the millions. I chose to protect humanity. That is my duty. "And can you live with that decision?" another counselor asked. "I don't have a choice," Deho replied quietly. "Living with it is my punishment and my responsibility." While politicians debated and military leaders defended their actions, Lieutenant Jiwan began her own investigation. She could not accept what had happened. She needed to understand the defense system better. She needed to know if there had been any other option. Using her security clearance and her growing reputation as a communications expert, Jiwan accessed classified files about the Sol defense perimeter. What she found shocked her. The spatial distortion technology was not human invention. It was ancient alien technology, recovered from ruins in the Ross 128 system. The files classified it as precursor technology from a species called Species 1. Species 1 had vanished approximately 4.7 million years ago. They left behind only ruins, automated systems, and fragments of warnings that humanity could barely translate. One partial warning that human scientists had translated read, "The border defends itself. Do not trigger what cannot be stopped." Jiwan felt a chill run down her spine. Humanity had found this technology scattered across 3 worlds. They had reverse-engineered enough to use it as a weapon, but they did not fully understand it. They did not know what they had truly activated. The Sol defense perimeter was not just automated. It was built on alien artificial intelligence that humanity did not fully comprehend. It operated according to logic that was not human logic. It saw territorial violations with absolute inhuman certainty. Jiwan realized that humanity did not fully control its own borders. They had made a bargain with something ancient and dangerous, something they did not understand but had weaponized anyway. 3 months after the incident, the Vex response finally arrived. Not a military fleet seeking revenge, not threats of war. Instead, a single diplomatic courier ship approached human space carefully, stopping well before the border and requesting permission to deliver a message. The message was brief and formal. "Your borders are acknowledged. We will not cross them again. But know this, we remember." Most of the galaxy interpreted this as the Vex backing down, as an unprecedented admission of boundaries by an empire that had never recognized the territorial claims of lesser species. But diplomat Sumi, who had studied Vex culture extensively, saw something else in the carefully chosen words. This was not submission. This was strategic repositioning. The Vex were not giving up. They were adapting. And species that survived for thousands of years were very good at adaptation. The phrase "we remember" was not a threat. It was a promise. The Vex would remember this lesson. They would study it. They would learn from it. And someday, in some way humanity could not yet predict, they would respond. But that was a problem for the future. For now humanity had to deal with the immediate aftermath, with the moral questions that divided their society, with the fear and hatred from other species, with the knowledge that they had killed 134,000 beings in the name of security. The question that consumed human society was simple but impossible to answer. Had they done the right thing? Was absolute defense justified? Where was the line between necessary security and excessive violence? Families divided over the question. Friends stopped speaking to each other. Entire colonies took opposing positions. It became the defining moral debate of the era. And deep in the Ross 128 system, on a frozen world where ancient ruins lay buried, the technology that had caused all this continued to operate, silent, patient, waiting for the next time someone would cross the line it had been programmed to defend. 1 year after the incident, an archaeological team working in the Ross 128 system made a discovery that would change everything. Dr. Hyun Kang, a specialist in ancient alien civilizations, had been searching the frozen moon Ross 128 CE for evidence of the precursor species. 3 kilometers beneath the ice, his team found an intact data repository. Not damaged ruins like previous discoveries, a complete functioning archive left behind by Species 1. It took months to access the repository safely. The technology was so advanced that human scientists struggled to interface with it. But eventually they succeeded. What they found inside was both illuminating and terrifying. Species 1 had not vanished mysteriously. They had not ascended to a higher plane of existence. They had been destroyed in a galactic war 4.7 million years ago, a war of expansion and conquest that consumed half the galaxy. The archive contained historical records of that war. Species 1 had been peaceful, focused on science and culture. When aggressive species began attacking their borders, they tried diplomacy. When diplomacy failed, they tried limited military response. Nothing worked. So they developed the spatial distortion technology as a last defensive measure, a weapon that would make their borders absolutely impenetrable. No one could cross the line without being destroyed instantly and completely. The technology worked. It worked too well. The aggressive species could not breach Species 1's borders, but Species 1 could not expand either. The defense system created a barrier that worked both ways. They were trapped inside their own territory, unable to reach new resources, unable to grow, slowly stagnating. As generations passed and resources dwindled, Species 1 turned on itself. Internal conflicts erupted. Civil wars raged. The civilization that had survived external threats destroyed itself from within. Dr. Hyun Kang found the complete text of the precursor warning. The fragment that humanity had translated earlier was only the beginning. The full message read, "The border defends itself. Do not trigger what cannot be stopped. We who built this right from inside our own prison. We sought absolute security and achieved absolute isolation. If you find this, learn from our mistake. Borders can be defended without becoming barriers. Security without wisdom becomes suicide. Turn back. Do not follow our path." Dr. Kang sat alone in his research station reading the warning over and over. Humanity was repeating the mistake of Species 1. They had built absolute defenses and were now becoming isolated from the galaxy. Feared rather than respected. Alone rather than safe. He sent his findings to Lieutenant Ji-won, who had been promoted to commander after her investigation into the defense system. Ji-won read the report with growing dread. Everything she had feared was confirmed. Humanity did not understand the technology they had weaponized. They were walking the same path that had destroyed Species 1. She brought the findings to Admiral Daeho expecting resistance. But instead she found a tired man who had been carrying a terrible secret. "Commander Ji-won," Daeho said quietly, "I need to show you something. This is classified at the highest level. Very few people know." He led her to a secure room and opened files that made her blood run cold. For months, Daeho had authorized secret studies into the defense system. Scientists had been trying to determine if humanity could modify it or deactivate it, or even understand how it truly worked. The answer to all 3 questions was no. The system was too complex, too alien, too deeply integrated into the fabric of space around human territory. The precursor artificial intelligence that ran it operated on principles that human science could barely detect, let alone understand. Any attempt to modify the system could trigger a catastrophic failure, or worse, it might cause the defense perimeter to expand, to redefine its parameters in ways humanity could not control. The scientists' final recommendation was clear. Do not touch it. Do not attempt changes, except that you do not fully control what you have activated. How long have you known? Jawan asked, her voice shaking. 6 months, Deho admitted. I couldn't share it without causing panic. If people knew that our primary defense system is something we don't understand and can't control, the fear would be overwhelming. But now Dr. Kang has found the precursor warning. The truth is going to come out anyway. Yes, Deho said, which is why I'm telling you now. We need to be ready for what comes next. What came next was a galactic investigation. When the Galactic Assembly learned about the precursor connection, they demanded access to the Ross 128 system. They sent a fact-finding mission led by Ambassador Voth, a member of the Kess species known for fair and neutral arbitration. Ambassador Voth and his team spent 3 months studying everything. They examined the defense network. They reviewed all records of the Vex incident. They studied the precursor data repository. They interviewed human scientists, military personnel, and civilians. When Ambassador Voth presented his findings to the Galactic Assembly, his report surprised everyone. He did not condemn humanity. He did not call them aggressors or murderers. Instead, he painted a picture of a species trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The report stated clearly, humanity did not invent the defense system. They discovered ancient technology and adapted it for survival. The Vex incident was not human cruelty, but the predictable outcome of triggering security protocols that humanity does not fully understand or control. But the report also included a stark warning. The Sol defense perimeter is dangerous to everyone, including humanity. It is a loaded weapon with a hair trigger. Every day it remains active is a day closer to potential catastrophe. Humanity is not the villain of this story. They are the unwitting custodians of something that could destroy them as easily as it destroyed the Vex fleet. The Galactic Assembly faced an uncomfortable truth. Condemning humanity was easy. Solving the actual problem was nearly impossible. No one had technology advanced enough to safely deactivate or modify precursor systems. The best scientists in the galaxy were helpless before 4.7 million-year-old artificial intelligence. Then came an offer that shocked everyone. The Vex Imperium, which had lost 134,000 personnel to the defense system, volunteered to help find a solution. Vex scientists had spent a year studying the incident from their own perspective. They believed they had identified a possible solution, not deactivation, which was too dangerous, but modification, creating a smart border that could distinguish between different types of border crossing. The proposal required integrating Vex quantum computing with human navigation systems and Kess diplomatic protocols. By combining technologies from 3 species, they might create a defense system that could tell the difference between hostile invasion and innocent mistake. It would require unprecedented cooperation, sharing classified technology, granting former enemies access to humanity's most critical security systems, trusting species that had every reason to want revenge. Captain Minho, who had been promoted to admiral after his actions during the crisis, advocated strongly for accepting the Vex offer. He believed this was humanity's chance to fix their mistake. To learn from Species 1's downfall instead of repeating it, Admiral Deho hesitated. His trust had been scarred by past betrayals. He remembered the contact wars. He remembered watching his friends die because they gave aliens the benefit of the doubt. How could he now trust the Vex with access to humanity's defenses? Diplomat Sumi returned from her galaxy-wide diplomatic campaign. She had spent months talking to representatives from dozens of species, building support, explaining humanity's position. Now she cast the deciding vote in humanity's Security Council. We accept the help, Sumi said firmly. We learn from Species 1's mistake. We don't let absolute security become absolute isolation. If we continue down this path alone, we will destroy ourselves just as they did. This is our chance to choose a different ending. The vote was close. Many humans still feared the Vex. Many believed cooperation was a trap. But in the end, the decision was made. Humanity would accept help from their former enemies. They would try to build something better than what Species 1 had left behind. It was a gamble, It might fail. It might make things worse, but it was better than doing nothing and waiting for the same fate that had befallen Species 1. The joint research project began 18 months after the Vex fleet disappeared. Scientists from 3 different species gathered at a neutral research station near the Ross 128 system. Humans, Vex, and Kess working together on what seemed like an impossible task. Dr. Hyun Kang led the human team. His specialty was understanding precursor technology, though he freely admitted that understanding was a generous word. The technology was so advanced that humans could barely grasp its basic principles. The Vex provided quantum computing algorithms that could process information at speeds human computers could not match. Their contribution would allow the system to analyze threats in real time, distinguishing between different types of border approaches. The Kess brought pattern recognition software that had been refined over thousands of years of diplomatic work. Their systems could detect subtle differences in behavior, intention, and communication that other species missed. Commander Jiwon served as the liaison between the 3 groups. It was not an easy role. Each species brought different assumptions about territory, security, and what defense actually meant. They spoke different languages, thought in different patterns, and often struggled to understand each other's basic concepts. Jiwon discovered that the technical challenges were actually easier than the philosophical ones. Getting 3 types of computer systems to work together was difficult but solvable. Getting 3 species to agree on what the system should do was much harder. But slowly, over months of patient work, they made progress. The modified system began to take shape. It would still defend human borders absolutely, but with graduated responses. A ship that accidentally strayed across the line would face a barrier, not destruction. A ship that ignored warnings and pushed forward aggressively would face stronger countermeasures. The key was teaching the ancient precursor artificial intelligence to recognize context, to understand that not every border crossing was a hostile act. It required integrating modern understanding with 4.7 million-year-old programming, a task that should have been impossible. That it worked at all was a miracle. That it worked well enough to test was beyond anyone's expectations. The first live test came when an independent cargo ship, the Wandering Star, suffered a navigation malfunction and accidentally crossed into human territory. The crew did not realize their mistake until alarms started blaring on their bridge. Under the old system, the ship would have been destroyed instantly. The crew would have died before they understood what was happening. But the modified Sol Defense Perimeter responded differently. It generated a spatial barrier that stopped the ship's forward progress but did not harm it. Automated warnings broadcast in 147 languages, explaining the situation and providing navigation data to help the ship correct its course safely. The Wandering Star's crew, terrified but alive, made the corrections and withdrew back across the border. They sent a message of thanks that spread rapidly across the galactic communication networks. For the first time, someone had crossed human borders accidentally and lived to tell about it. The test was considered a success. The galaxy celebrated. The joint research team received awards and recognition. It seemed like a new era was beginning, but Admiral Daeho noted something troubling in the technical reports. The modified system's response time was 3.4 seconds slower than the original. In a genuine military incursion by a fast-moving fleet, those seconds could mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic failure. Security and mercy were in tension. Making the system smarter meant making it slower. The question remained, was the trade-off worth it? Humanity decided it was. Not everyone agreed with the decision, but the majority accepted that the old system's absolute approach had been unsustainable. Better to face the universe with slightly reduced security and the possibility of friendship than to face it alone behind impenetrable walls. Memorial was constructed in orbit around Ross 128. It honored the 134,000 Vex personnel who had died. The monument was controversial from the beginning. Many humans saw it as an apology for necessary defense. Many Vex saw it as inadequate recognition of lives lost, but it stood nonetheless. A strange geometric structure designed by Kess architects to incorporate both human and Vex aesthetic principles. It was not beautiful in any traditional sense, but it meant something. It acknowledged that the dead deserved to be remembered, regardless of the circumstances of their deaths. At the memorial's dedication ceremony, Admiral Daeho gave a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. His words were simple but profound. We do not apologize for defending our borders. We do not apologize for surviving. But we acknowledge that survival came at a terrible cost, paid by people who did not understand what they faced until it was too late. We honor them not as enemies, but as teachers who showed us what our security truly costs, and we pledge to learn from that lesson. In the years that followed, the main characters went their separate ways, each carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. Admiral Minho took command of Proxima Station, dedicating his career to refining the border protocols. He worked tirelessly to improve the system, to find ways to balance security and proportionality. He never fully reconciled with Admiral Deho's decisions during the crisis, but he came to understand them. Understanding was not the same as agreement, but it was enough. Commander Jiwan became the head of communications for the entire Seoul Defense Network. She established the Galactic Border Translation Service, a hotline that provided real-time translation and mediation for any ship approaching human territory. She still heard Rix's last words in her nightmares, but she channeled that grief into ensuring no one else would die from simple misunderstanding. Diplomat Sumi became Earth's Secretary of Interstellar Relations. Her experience with the Vex incident shaped a new diplomatic doctrine that she called clear borders, open dialogue. Human territory remained defended, but human culture became increasingly integrated with galactic civilization. Humanity maintained the strength to protect itself, but the wisdom to build friendships. Admiral Deho retired to a remote colony world. He spent his final years writing a memoir titled The Weight of Necessary Things. The book became required reading at military academies across human space. In it, he argued that strength without wisdom was not strength at all, and that the hardest part of command was living with the consequences of necessary decisions. He died peacefully in his sleep at age 87, having spent 2 decades teaching young officers that the goal of military power was not to use it, but to prevent the need to use it. 20 years after the incident, humanity's borders remained absolute but no longer automated unto death. The Seoul defense perimeter had been modified 17 times, each iteration learning from close calls and mistakes. It prevented 14 genuine military incursions and turned back 3,947 accidental border crossings, all without casualties. The system became a model that other species studied and adapted for their own use. The galaxy learned that borders could be respected without being weapons. The Vex Imperium never crossed into human territory again, but they did not need to. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and scientific cooperation created connections that made territorial expansion unnecessary. The two species were not friends exactly, but they were no longer enemies. They were neighbors with all the complicated coexistence that implied. On Ross 128C, next to the ancient precursor data repository, humanity installed a new beacon. It broadcast continuously in 147 languages, designed to last 1,000,000 years. The message was simple. We found warnings left by those who came before. We ignored them and paid the price in blood. If you find this, know that borders can be respected without being weapons. Security can be achieved without isolation. We learned these lessons the hard way. Learn them from us instead. This is not a threat. This is a teaching. May you be wiser than we were. The story of the Vex fleet that disappeared forever became a legend told across the galaxy. But the real lesson was not about the fleet's destruction. It was about what came after. Humanity learned that survival alone was not enough. You had to survive in a way that let you live with what you had done. You had to be strong enough to defend yourself, but wise enough to know when defense became something darker. The aliens had dismissed warnings about Earth's borders, and their fleet disappeared forever. But what emerged from that tragedy was a galaxy that learned to respect boundaries not from fear, but from understanding. And perhaps that was the lesson Species 1 had tried to teach 4.7 million years ago. Perhaps humanity was finally ready to learn it.